Well, hey, if we haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name's Austin, one of the pastors here. Have you ever had something that you thought was really, really valuable? Or what's the most valuable thing that you currently own? When I was 10, a family friend of mine who collected baseball cards gave me this box, and it was full of baseball cards. And again, he was a collector, so he knew his stuff. And he said, "Hey, Austin, I want to give you this gift. Love you, man. This is an investment into your future, and here you go." And he wrote notes on it like, "Don't put this in your spokes for your bike, to make it sound like a motorcycle, and don't sell them in the next year or so to just cash out. Like, save these things, and in 20 years." Open them up, and I want, and then in that space, see how much you can sell them for, and maybe it'll be a down payment on a house or whatever. I'm like, oh, this is amazing. So truly, for 20 years, these things have been with me through middle school, through high school, college, going to Wesleyan, moving to Lincoln, moving to Africa, Omaha to Lincoln, all the houses we bought and moved from. Me, this little box, Kristen knows, has been with me, and I'm thinking, man, gosh, when I turn 30, like, that's gonna be it. I'm gonna open it up, and I've waited, and it's like this great thing that's increased. It's gonna be awesome. I'm thinking, like, my kid's college fund, help buy the building, for us, like a new building, it'd be great. Like, all this stuff. Obviously, maybe a new e-bike or something like that. And so I'm like, I'm ready. And then, so I have a friend of mine who like knows baseball pretty well and cards and stuff like that. He's got some valuable ones. I said, "Hey, man, we check it out." He's like, "Sure, let's do it." And I was like, "Okay, come over." And I'm just looking. I'm like, "Man, I'm going to cash in. This is going to be great." You know how you spend money before you actually get it? Like, that's kind of where I was. Like, I had a couple things in my cart on Amazon because of the goal, I was like ready. And anyways, we're doing that. We're ready for it. We're excited. And he looks, and I was like, "Okay, man, so what do we got? What do we got?" And he's like, "Yeah, these are old cards." "Really? But they're good cards, right?" Gotta be honest, there's nothing that stands out about these things. And I'm like, "So, like, what are we talking, like a couple thousand? Like, like old, like a couple thousand old, or like a couple hundred?" Or he's like, "Maybe a McDonald's value meal, like maybe the value menu." Yeah. I'm like, "Oh no." So anyway, it was a nightmare, right? So I'm giving them to my kids to mess around with, but after 20 years of thinking they're valuable, they're clearly not. We're good on this? Sounds a little bit weird for my part. Okay, should I just switch to the mic? You think keep it? Okay, we're keeping it. Does this sound okay to you guys? Anybody thinks it's like iffy? Sounds right? Okay, sounds a little echoey. But anyway, so we'll go with that. So have you ever had that where you thought something was super, super valuable and then you get checked out and you're like, "That was not a real Chanel bag. Like, that was a knockoff from downtown." But anyways, if that hasn't happened to you, it's going to today. Okay, just so you know. If you, James is like this, gloves off, like, just let you have it, like, let me go. And he's been doing this all through this letter he's written. Jesus' brother has done this over and over again. And we're talking about wisdom this morning. That's the main theme, main thread through this. And wisdom is something that whoever you are, wherever you are, you have been inundated with wisdom. Your whole life has been around learning, school, education, tests, grades, GPA, other stuff, acquiring, continue education, all that stuff. And we've learned and we've learned and we've learned and learned. And some of us spent our entire lives accumulating all of this wisdom, all of these things. We have this nice little diploma, and James is going to grab it and he's going to put it right through the shredder. And he's going to go, "All of your wisdom, whatever it is, if it's not rooted in God, if it's not motivated by His glory, it's literally worthless." And so it doesn't matter if you have your doctorate, master's, whatever. He goes, or even theologically, he's doing all of that. If it isn't resulting in a love for God and people, if it isn't for the glory of God, if it isn't rooted in God, it's worthless. And James has given us the gift throughout this whole letter of clarity, right? He goes, "Hey, do you want to know how you're doing with the test of trials? You want to know how what pure religion is? You want to know what if you're taming the tongue? You want to know if you have dead faith or real faith? You want to know all these things?" And he goes, and today's going, "You want to know if you have real wisdom? Let me tell you how. Let me tell you how to know if you have a real wisdom." So the kind of main point, sermon in a sentence from these verses summarized, is that true wisdom from God is made by God, it's motivated by purity, and it's marked by meekness. So that's what we're going to be walking through with kind of as framework for the 3 points as we walk through these verses. So looking at that. So first question we're going to ask is, who is true wisdom made by? Who is true wisdom made by? And the answer obviously is God. But I'll show you as we look through the text. So look at verse 15. he's talking about two different kinds of wisdom. And he says, this is not the wisdom that comes down from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. And look at verse 17. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere. So James is saying there's two types of wisdom. There's a wisdom from above, and there's a wisdom from below. So my sub point, and I'll give these for each point, but if you want to be wise, ask God. If you want to be wise, ask God. Now, I've got 3 kids, 5, 3, and 1, almost 2. They're adorable, Gracie, Eden, and Haddon. And they've been playing the if mom says no, ask dad thing a lot recently, okay? And I just want you to know it works every single time, all right? So don't tell them that because they probably know that. But here's how it plays out. They go to Kristen, hey, Mom, can we have some of our Halloween candy? And Kristen's like, kids, like, no, you've had 3 or 4 pieces. No, like just wait, eat an apple, something like that. Here's a cheese stick. But, come back and maybe after dinner, if you guys eat your whole dinner, you'll have it. And then like, okay. And then they scurry out to find me outside or whatever. And they're like, hey, Dad, can we have some of our Halloween candy? I'm like, only if I'm first. I call the Reese's. Like, it's like this whole thing. And then they're just like gorging on like all this chocolate. And Kristen's like, what happened? I'm like, I don't know. It's all gone. I don't know what happened. Eden kept eating them, and it just happened, But it happens all the time, right? If mom says no, go ask dad. But I've realized that Christians do this same thing to God. When we don't like what he says, when we don't enjoy his thoughts on something, we go, okay, well, I'm going to go and ask someone else. I'm going to go and ask something else. So we go to the world, we go to culture, we go to friends, we go to social media to get the answer we're wanting. And if you're wondering how to understand sexuality in a world that has never been more confused about it, and you're like, oh man, okay, well, let me search God's word, and you search and you're like, oh no, that's tough. That's tough to swallow. And you go, well, maybe I'll go and I'll just listen to a podcast about sexuality or a TV show that explains it or pop culture or movies or whatever it is rather than going to God to understand it. And I just want to say, you're always going to find it. You're always going to find the answer you're wanting when you're not looking, when you're willing to look anywhere. And that's one of the reasons that I love God because I'm like, it makes me love him more because I'm like, man, he's not this spineless, bending, rollover God willing to submit to the cultural protest. He stands firm and unmoved, albeit with tears of compassion in his eyes as many rebel from his ways, but he cannot lower his standards and change his mind. Jesus was a friend of sinners, to be clear. He was magnetic to the worst of the worst. And yet, in that same sense, while he was so attractive to rebels, he didn't compromise his mission. He didn't compromise what he believed about sin. He wasn't tainted by it, but he changed the people that he was around. So there's a possibility within God to have this sense where I'm immovable, I'm unchangeable. This is what I think, this is what I know is true. And yet, even if you're distant from that, there's still an invitation to come. And he's going, come and learn from me. Watch, walk with me, trust me. But I want you to know that this tendency to go elsewhere for wisdom, this tendency to ask, someone else to get a different answer than you got from God, it's not something new that we created in 2022. In Genesis, the first book of the Bible, in the creation narrative, God gives Adam and Eve his grace, his wisdom, responsibility, his instructions, and then the serpent comes. We know it to be Satan, comes on the scene, and he gives contrary wisdom to God's wisdom. And he gives another answer to Eve. And in Genesis 3, verse 6, it says that the tree was desired to make one wise. And so she ate. She compromised on the wisdom God gave her, and she chose Satan's wisdom, and she ate this tree that was supposed to make her wise. She went to a different route, a different source for wisdom, and it brought sin into the world. She was chasing a different answer, and she got it. Like I said, you just always will, but she quickly regretted it. Eve got a different kind of wisdom that God had given her. What was that wisdom? Verse 7 follows that. The result is that they realized they were naked, and so they covered themselves. In this wisdom, they realized that they were broken, and they hid themselves from God. So this fresh bite of new wisdom produced insecurity and shame, which led to hiding and pretending. It never works out to go ask elsewhere. It just never works. But I want you to look at verse 15 with me, and I want you to notice the words he uses to describe this wisdom from below. Verse 15, this is not wisdom that comes down from above, but it's earthly, it's unspiritual, and it's demonic. So earthly. This is not considering eternity. So earthly wisdom is banking on all our decisions that our life fits into these 90 years we get if we're lucky, right? This wisdom is YOLO. Live it up, drink from every well, search every alley, no regrets, say yes to every adventure. This earthly wisdom neglects to realize James 4:14 that says your life's a mist. I mean, it's a vapor. It's here today. It's gone tomorrow. What really matters is the next 10,000 years. What really matters is the next 4 billion years in eternity, and earthly wisdom refuses to consider that. Live it up now. Do everything you can now, and don't worry about the future. So first thing, it's earthly. Number two, James says that this wisdom from below is unspiritual. So this is not sensitive to the Spirit. This is a wisdom that fights against God's Spirit and his calling. So this is wisdom based on facts, on calculations, on logic. And please don't hear me say that God or faith is anti-logical or illogical or whatever, but there are aspects to what God calls us to that is illogical and not ordinary. But I've got a friend, she's an actuary, she's brilliant, and her job is to assess the financial cost of risk and uncertainty, which is such a bizarre job description. Like my job description, preach to people, lead, make disciples. Hers, assess the cost of risk and uncertainty. Like, it's just bizarre to me. But insurance agencies know what they're signing up for when you pay them, when they bring you on under their insurance. They know the risk, and certainly they've assessed that. Actuaries make that possible. So even in the risk, there's really not that much risk because they've already calculated the risk, right? It all happens. And I think some of us live our lives with the wisdom like we live our faith in Jesus or wisdom from him like an actuary. Like it's so calculated, it's so logical, it's so organized. And I just think there has to be more flexibility. And James would say it's unspiritual. It's not guided, led, sensitive by the Spirit. And so it's like, well, I can give this much, that I still can make sure that I retire early and it's going to be cushion good. Or I can have this conversation that gets spiritual but not too spiritual, so this person's going to think I'm weird or not invite me to their Halloween party or Christmas party or whatever, or Friendsgiving. Or I can drive this route and I won't have to drive past those homeless people that I always feel bad about passing and not helping. And it's like, is there any room for the Spirit to go do something? And would you be sensitive enough to change your route? Or to go do something different, or to have that conversation, or to give that gift. And it's like we've lived our lives and we think it's wisdom from God, and it's like it's so logical, it's so calculated, it's so closed off and calloused that there's no room for him to actually speak and you to hear and obey and respond accordingly. The last word he uses to describe wisdom from below is demonic in verse 15. And this is just, clearly it's not honoring God. This is strong language too. James is saying that this wisdom that isn't from above isn't just not from above, it's actually from below. That's the source. That's where it's from, that Satan created it. He wrote up the curriculum. He's the dean of that college. He's got the syllabus. We saw it in Genesis 3, right? Eve had God's wisdom, and Satan offered her different wisdom. Here's another option, a different way to see it, a different way to approach it, a different way to get things. And it's subtle. It's really subtle, and that's why it's so dangerous. Because Satan's wisdom, or the wisdom from below, this demonic wisdom, doesn't sound like demonic. It doesn't have, ears and a pitchfork and a tail or whatever. It's like, it seems normal. It seems logical. It goes, oh yeah, like, why wouldn't I do that? Why wouldn't I partake in that? And so we do it. That's why it's so dangerous. And yet, to every forbidden fruit he invites us to sink our teeth into, a curse comes. And it's sweet. It's so sweet. And then it's unbelievably bitter. This is wisdom that's demonic. But then look at verse 17. Verse 17 says in juxtaposition, that's wisdom from below. But the wisdom from above is first pure, peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy, good fruits, impartial, and sincere. So this is the same language he uses in James 1, verse 17, when he says, every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights. The same language is from above, like God's giving it. That's the only source it comes from. And then in James 1:5, it says, if anyone lacks wisdom, let him ask God. Like, if you want to be wise, ask him. Go to him before you go to anyone else, and you'll find what you're actually looking for. Now, I drive a Ford F-150 truck, and I'm a little bit insecure about this, but a lot of people say they're surprised that I drive a truck, which I just don't know what that means. It's like, do I look like a Kia guy? Do I look like I drive a Prius? Like, we need to have a conversation. I just don't know, And so just, what kind of car do you think I drive, And so anyways, we got to figure that out. I got to process that with God, but get his wisdom. But anyways, but if there's a problem with my Ford F-150, I'm not going to take it to a Dodge dealership. I'm not going to take it to a Chevy dealership. I'm not going to take it to a Mazda dealership or a Honda dealership. I'm going to take it to a Ford dealership, because Ford made that vehicle. Ford dealerships work on that vehicle over and over and over again. They know the problem when I haven't even finished explaining what the problem is, right? They create it, they know it. And yet we'd all agree with that logic. We go, of course, take your car to where it was made. And yet we don't live that logic out when it comes to God, right? Like we have all these things that God's purposefully, beautifully, intentionally created. He's made them, and then we go, okay, thank you, and we take them to a different dealership to help us understand what they didn't make. And so it's like, I want to learn about sex. Okay, well, watch some movies, TV show, porn, whatever, talk to your friends. I want to learn about money. Okay, well, great, just, watch the stocks, read finance books, see what Elon does, talk to financial advisors. I want to learn about marriage. Well, emulate what your parents did and watch The Notebook and take the 5 love languages, Okay, great. I want to learn about leadership. Well, just observe your favorite politicians or read 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. But friends, God created sex, and he created marriage, and he created money, and he created leadership, and he has something to say about all of those things. And John 10:10 says the enemy came to steal and destroy, but Jesus says he comes to bring life and bring it abundantly. So I think one of the reasons that we don't want God's wisdom is because we think that it's going to be bland or barbaric or inhibitive or suppressive. And it's like, no, he actually knows how to have the best sex within marriage, and he knows how to have an intimate union for decades within marriage, and he knows how to influence. He knows how to influence into leadership and thrive financially and all those things. And so I think one of the reasons we just don't ask God for wisdom is because we don't believe what he has to say is going to be good. I actually think I'm going to get better advice from someone else or somewhere else rather than go to God. And it's like, really? You think that the Dodge dealership's going to do a better job fixing my Ford than the Ford dealership? That just doesn't work that way. The other reason we don't go to God for wisdom is that his answers aren't immediate. Like I typed a question to Google last night, and I got 55 million results in 0.6 seconds. Okay? God doesn't work that way. Like you've got to be patient if you want God's wisdom. You've got to ask, and you've got to wait. You got to trust in the confusion. You've got to labor in his word, just flipping through it, going, God, I want to know. You got to sit patiently in prayer. It's just not immediate, right? But you want to know one of the biggest dealerships we go to, other than God, we're actually created. It's not just social media. It's not just pop culture. It's not just friends. One of the biggest dealerships we go to is our feelings, our emotions. I'm not saying that feelings or emotions are bad. Don't hear me say that. But rather than asking God, going to his word for wisdom, asking his spirit for wisdom, we actually ask ourselves. And the primary decision maker, source of wisdom is our emotion. And we elevate it to this place and go, what do I feel like would be best in this moment? What do I think in this moment? And our emotions are so fickle, aren't they? They're just so ebb and flow and change daily. And I'm just saying, pleading, don't trust them. Don't trust them. Going to the world to figure out what God made is even worse than me bringing my Ford truck to a Toyota dealership. It'd be like me taking my truck to the McDonald's drive-thru and going, hey, I want a Big Mac, but I also want you to figure out my truck. It's absurdity. It just would never make sense. You want to be wise, friends? Ask God. Don't ask elsewhere. Go to friends, mentors, people you trust, all that. But go to God and keep going to him. Go to him before anyone else and keep going back to him. Treat his word like you treat Google. Oh, I don't know about this. Okay, I'm going to type. Just treat his word like, man, God, I want to learn. I want to know. Treat prayer like you treat social media. Just always go into it for whatever. It's like, go there. Talk to God on a daily, regular, consistent basis. Ask him to help you to believe that he actually knows best. Real wisdom comes from above, not anywhere else. So that's the first thing. Second question we're going to answer is, what is true wisdom motivated by? So we know where it's from, but if we want it, why do we want it? Or what should we want it for? The answer is purity. So look at verse 14. We'll read 14 through 17 just to get this section holistically. It says, but if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, don't boast and be false to the truth. This isn't the wisdom that comes from above, but it's earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder in every vile practice. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy, good fruits, impartial, and sincere. So first one was, you want to be wise, ask God. Second thing, you want to be wise, ask why. You want to be wise, ask why. Now, if you're familiar with the Bible and you're thinking about wisdom, a guy named Solomon probably pops in your mind. Okay, Solomon was King David's son, David and Goliath. And in 1 Kings chapter 3, Solomon has become king. And it's hard, right? It's a big role. And he interacts with God in a dream. And in this dream, Solomon asks God for wisdom. And it's not just wisdom for whatever, it's to help him lead the nation he's been entrusted to lead. And God is so impressed by his request for wisdom rather than power or a long life or riches that he goes, I'm going to give you unparalleled wisdom more than anyone else. And I'm going to give you a long life and riches and power and success and all of this stuff. So that's Solomon. And I think we can look at that story and go, oh, and we can deduce naturally, God must really like when we ask for wisdom, right? Like he liked when Solomon did it, and that was the impressive thing. So I don't know so much if it's like, let me ask him for, a new promotion or that new version of that phone or whatever. But he for sure likes when I ask for wisdom. But James isn't saying that same thing here. Look at verse 14. He says, if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast and be false to the truth. So he's saying, in your pursuit of wisdom, even in your asking of God for wisdom, if selfish ambition and bitter jealousy exist, then your wanting of wisdom is polluted, and God hates it. He's not interested in giving you wisdom if that's the reason you want it. You get what I'm saying? And so rather than continually asking what kind of wisdom we want, or what we want of wisdom, we should be asking, why do I want it? Why do I want to be wise? And let me just be clear. I think everyone's on the same page. I've never met a single person who doesn't want to be wise or doesn't want to be seen as wise. We want to be the person people come to and go, hey, I have a question. What do you think? Or hey, I need your advice. We love being that person. We never want to be caught without having an answer to something, right? We always want to be the person who gives the sweet insight at the dinner table or the theological profound thought at city group or whatever. And so James is saying, okay, that's all great. It's good to know stuff, but check your motives. Check your heart. Dig in and realize, why do I want to be wise? Why do I want to know those things? And he goes, is your desire to be wise rooted in bitter jealousy? Is the main reason you want to learn more to just basically make the know-it-all seem like they don't know it all? Is the main reason you want to learn something is so everyone else in the room goes, wow, she knows something or he knows something? Is your pursuit of wisdom rooted in selfish ambition? Do you want to learn and grow and acquire skills just so that you can be self-sufficient and grow and exceed and climb up the ladder so that you're like, I don't need anybody anymore? There was something about Solomon's request that God absolutely loved. And my question is, well, what was it? Like, what was it about Solomon's request that made it special, that made God go, oh, I love that. Yeah, I'm going to pour it out to you. Well, here's what Solomon says to God specifically in 1 Kings 3. This is verse 7 through 9. Solomon says, now, Lord, my God, you've made your servant king in place of my father David, but I am only a little child and do not know how to carry out my duties. Your servant is here among the people you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to count or number. So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. For who is able to govern these great people of yours? Do you see it in there? There's so much. He calls himself a servant, a child. I don't know anything. I can't understand all this stuff. And I really just want to lead your people. James 3:17 tells us what Solomon's desire was so special for wisdom that God actually loved. James 3:17, but wisdom from above is first pure. That word first is so intriguing to me. That he wouldn't just go, wisdom from God is pure and peaceable and gentle, but he says, no. And the whole process of wisdom, it's not just a bunch of things slapped onto a wall. There's actually a process to it, and the very first place it has to start is purity, which is juxtaposed to verse 15, that it's rooted in selfish ambition and bitter jealousy. You get what I'm saying? He's going, this is purity. This is God's wisdom. This is what he loves to give to. If you're selfishly ambitious and you're bitter jealousy, whatever, it's just, that's again, it's polluted. And so God knew Solomon's heart. He saw the purity to admit he didn't know anything and that he wasn't wanting to be a memorable king. He didn't ask, God, would you give me wisdom to write books or whatever? It's like, no, you just give me a responsibility and I just want to do it well. And God goes, yeah, man, I love that. And he had the faith to ask, and God gave him generously. So for you, friends, I got to ask, is your request for wisdom, is your desire to know more, biblically, culturally, professionally, attached to selfishly ambitious goals? If it is, ask God to kill it in your heart. Cut it out. I don't want that. Ask him to give you pure motivation. Make God's glory and his grace and his gospel being known your highest ambition. Is your pursuit of wisdom to learn more professionally, personally, theologically, attached to bitter jealousy, where you want to be seen as the smart person? You want to be seen as the one who knows it all. Remember, you're not the main point, and neither am I. You're not the main act. You're the MC. In fact, you're probably not even the MC. We're the guy in the light in the back, shining the light on the stage. That's us. This is Jesus. I don't want it to be about me. I want it to be about him. I love the line, the quote, preach the gospel, die and be forgotten. Like, that would be our lives. Like, I don't care who gets the credit. I just want to make Jesus famous. So friends, if you want to be truly wise, before you ever ask what, start with asking why. Why do I want to be wise? Why do I want to know this? So we know who true wisdom is made by, God, and we know what true wisdom is motivated by, purity, rather than selfish ambition, bitter jealousy. But what is true wisdom marked by? Like, what's it actually look like? Like, we've been talking about, it's ethereal, but like, if we were to put flesh on that skeleton, what's it actually look like? So last thing we're questioning is, what is true wisdom marked by? The answer is meekness. Meekness. So look at verse 13. He says, who is wise and understanding among you? By his good conduct, let him show you his works in the meekness of wisdom. Then look at 16 and 17. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there'll be disordered every vile practice, but the wisdom from above is first pure, peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere. So you want to be wise, ask God. You want to be wise, ask why. And lastly, you want to be wise, ask questions. Ask questions. When you think of somebody really wise, like if I'm just going, hey, who is really wise? What are traits of someone that's really wise? What do you think of? Like, what thoughts come to mind? For some reason, the first thing that came to mind is a bald head. I don't know why, but like, Clay, I think you're wise, man. But you know, Jeff, Doug, like the whole thing, right? But I just think of a bald head. Anyway, or gray hair, you know, I don't know. But really, I mean, what do you think of a wisdom? I'm thinking like, a lot of knowledge, a lot of information. The person who's great at trivia night, you know, all those different things. Like I'm thinking like, you know, and even spiritually in a Christian lens, like I just think someone who knows their Bible really well, who can just quote it really easy, really naturally. Like that's what I think of for wisdom, a lot of that. But James actually paints an extremely different picture than what we just talked about of what we think of wisdom. Check it out in the verses. Look at verse 13. Who is wise and understanding among you? By his good conduct. He doesn't say by his good advice or by her good advice. And then he goes on to say, let him show his works, okay? Not say his wise words, but show his works. Then you look at verse 17. And again, the wisdom from above is first pure, peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy, good fruits, impartial, and sincere. Listen, you have to catch this on this. Not a single one of that list of examples has anything to do with informational intelligence. Take that in. His explanation of wisdom is not attached in any way, shape, or form to informational intelligence. So if you're reading this description of wisdom from Jesus' brother James, someone who never attended middle school could be extremely wise. And someone who has their doctorate from Harvard could be extremely foolish. You get what I'm saying? It's almost like all of us are at an art show. We're at an art gallery. And we're like just in awe with this painting. And it's the painting of wisdom when we're like, oh, wow, when we're observing, go, that's so beautiful. And I love this thing. And I don't even know what you say at art stuff. But I'm like, it's really cool. And we're like, that's awesome. And it's wisdom. And James walks up. He's like, okay. And he walks up and he goes, boom. He takes it off the wall and he smashes it across his knee. And he points to the humble janitor and goes, that's wisdom. That's wisdom. Not something you observe and awe at, but a real embodied practical wisdom. That's wisdom. We've got it so mistaken. We've got it so messed up. And our view of wisdom, honestly, is a train wreck. I mean, look at verse 16. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder in every vile practice. It doesn't even say where jealousy and selfish ambition run rampant. It says where they exist. If there's any root of it, if it's peeking its head at all, disorder, every vile practice. So where wisdom from below exists, made by Satan, motivated by bitter jealousy and selfish ambition, you're only going to find disorder in every vile practice. You want to know what worldly wisdom is marked by? That chaos. So think about this for a second. We right now are more exposed to the world's wisdom than anyone has ever been in the entire universe. We have so much at our fingertips. I'm a 30-year-old middle-class pastor, and I typed a question on Google and got 55 million results in 0.6 seconds. We can get anything we want. We can know about anything we would ever desire. There are 800 million videos on YouTube, 800 million. And with the average video being 11 minutes long, that's 9 billion minutes of content. So it would take you 18,000 years to watch all that content consecutively through. And that's not accounting for the daily content that's uploaded, right? There are 2.2 million podcasts to listen to. There are 130 million books to read. We've got more theological commentaries than ever before, Bible translations, seminaries, and with all that access to all this information, have we grown in our love for people? With all that stuff that we have, we can read it and know it, and we got it at our fingertips. Has it made us more like Jesus? Have we become more passionate because of all that stuff for the nations and for the glory of God to be known among other people? Are we better at sharing the gospel? Or are we more divided than ever? Or is there more hate present in our lives? Is there more tension between us? Man, this wisdom we're pursuing is producing the opposite of what we think it will. James is saying, wake up. Stop ignoring that. He's not saying don't stop learning, stop reading, but he's saying, man, all that stuff isn't going to produce what you think it's going to produce. And I need to be really careful with this next section, so I'm going to try and nuance this. But not all the time, but often, the peak of radical love in a Christian's life and a fervency for sharing the gospel is often right after they come to know Jesus. I've seen it play out all the time, and it played out in my life big time. So when I first started following Jesus 10 years ago, I didn't know what complementarian or egalitarian or cessationist or continuationist or Arminian or Calvinist or premillennialist or amillennialist, all the ists. I didn't know any of the ists, right? I just knew Jesus called me to make disciples and to preach the gospel, and that's what I did. And people were coming to know Jesus. I didn't even know the gospel that way. All I knew is that we were all sinners and all broken, and that Jesus offers us salvation through faith alone in him. And I just was sharing with people, and people were coming to know Jesus. And then you take that, and it's amazing. Then I started to be able to define some of those theological terms. And I honestly think it sidetracked me for a while. Like, if you looked at the little I knew 10 years ago and the impact I was making for his kingdom, and then you look at all that I've known now, 10 years later, seminary degree, pastoring the church, and you went to what I know now from what I knew then, and the impact I'm making now, not publicly to all you guys, but personally, like in my own heart, like sitting at a dinner table or sitting at a table at a restaurant or walking on the street. If you look at those two things, what I know now and the impact I'm making, I really genuinely think my impact personally was greater back then. What happened? And maybe that's your story. You're going, yeah, man, I don't know if I love as radically as I did back then. I don't know if I'm crazy about sharing the gospel. And maybe that's not your story. Praise God. But please hear me say this. I love theology. I have a bigger view of God than I ever have. I love his Bible more than I ever have and know it better. I have a clearer view of heaven, all that stuff. Don't take this as me telling you to steer away from learning theology. The Christian should never stop in our pursuit of learning more about God. But hear me give a real warning. If the more you learn isn't translating to the more you love God and the more you love people, then it's worthless. It's worthless. Oh yeah, I'm wise. Really? How? Well, now, I'm a Calvinist now and I know Reformed theology. Okay, great. How do you love people? Has that made you love God more? Well, yeah, I think it's made me love God more. He's sovereign. He's in control. He chose me. Awesome. Well, what about for people? Are you more passionate to share the gospel? Well, yeah. No, man, if it isn't resulting in more love for people, it's worthless. If it's not resulting in more love for God, it's worthless. He could care less about your proper definition of those theological terms. He's not impressed with how well you debate other Christians. He isn't interested in where you land on end times. That's not what the wisdom from God actually looks like. You don't believe me? Look at verse 13 again. Who is wise and understanding among you? By his good conduct, let him show his works in the meekness of wisdom. Love that phrase, the meekness of wisdom. The word meek is super intriguing to me. Jesus identified himself as meek in Matthew 11. And can we just be honest for a second? Nobody wants to be called meek. It's like, yeah, I was hanging out in Subway and I was going through the line picking out, I want onions, but no, whatever. And they were like, you know what? You're really meek. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. That makes my day. You know, we don't like no one in like senior year for your yearbook is like, oh, please, I hope I got, most meek. You know, you're like, I hope I got best dressed or most likely to succeed or something, but not most meek. And yet this word is beautiful. And this idea of meekness should mark every single Christian, and it for sure should mark your wisdom. The word meek in the Greek means, the picture it presents is a war horse under control. Catch that. Meek means a war horse under control. The powerful beast who carefully chooses when to express that power. That's meekness. And that's the picture James is painting for us of wisdom. In the New Testament, check this out. Jesus asked a ton of more questions than he was asked. Through the accounts of Jesus' life, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Jesus asked 307 different questions, and he was only asked 183. Think about that. If you look at the questions that he was asked, he often answers them with another question. And it's like, what's going on? What are you doing? And you just think about this for a second. Jesus knows everything. Every motive, every feeling, every secret, every fact, he knows all of it. And yet it's not like he was just bursting at the seams to tell everybody how much he knew. He just asked questions. He just was sitting with people going, what do you think? Or what do you think about this? So they go, Jesus, and he wasn't just going, chomping in the bed, go, oh, let me tell you, and let me make sure you know I'm really wise. He was like, I want to hear what you think. And you're looking at this and going, wow, it's just, so that is the meekness of wisdom. You're not chomping at the bit to share your brilliant theological epiphany at Citigroup or in your community. You're not quick to condescend to a new believer struggling to articulate a theological thought. You're not trying to impress the group by your Bible memory. Verse 17 is an example of wisdom from God, being marked by being peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy, good fruits, impartial and sincere. Doesn't that sound like Jesus, that descriptor of verse 17, like exactly like him? And doesn't that sound the opposite of some of the smartest people we know of? If you want to be wise, friends, be a continual learner. If you want to be wise like Jesus, hear me say this, ask questions before you assert your opinion. Like just be a learner, just be inquisitive. With all that, you want to know where the world's wisdom and God's wisdom collide the most, where they butt heads the most? It's not sexuality, it's not marriage, it's not finances, it's not politics, it's not conflict. The place where God's wisdom and the world's wisdom collide the most are in one place, and it's the cross of Jesus. This is what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 1, verse 18. He says, for the word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it's the power of God. So Paul says, the wisdom of the world thinks that the story of the cross is stupid. It's nonsense. I mean, wisdom from the world says we can save ourselves, right? Like that's what American culture and the American dream presents. You're good enough. It's the American dream. You can do it. Pull yourselves up by your bootstraps. We can work hard enough. We can do that. We can climb up the spiritual mountain. We can tilt the ethical scales. We can claw our way up the moral mountain. All that stuff. But wisdom from God says, no, you're dead in sin. You're not in need of healing. You're in need of a resurrection. You don't need a moral jolt of energy. You need saving, extravagant grace. You're not pretty good and sometimes bad. You're altogether rotten to the core without God. Wisdom from the world says, how can you trust that a 33-year-old Jewish man in the Middle East 2,000 years ago died as a sufficient sacrifice for everyone in the world who would believe? Really? That's what you want to bank your life on? And wisdom from God says Jesus paid it all and all to him I owe. Wisdom from the world says God can only save certain people. Wisdom from God says, come all who are weary and find rest in Jesus, the friend of sinners. Christians are fools to the world. The world won't look at us and go, wow, that's wisdom. We're banking our lives on what they would think is completely foolish. And so listen, if that's true, if that's what we believe about the gospel, that's what saves us, if that's what 1 Corinthians 1:18 says is the power of God to save, if the basis of that is foolishness, then why would we want to avert from the gospel, go away and go, well, I might be foolish in the gospel, but I want to be wise to the world? Doesn't make sense. If I'm foolish in my salvation, according to the world, then I should be foolish in every other aspect of my life. And I'm not saying be an idiot, or whatever. I'm just saying there's a reality in that of going, I'm just not going to make sense to the world. The way I spend my money, the way I pursue relationships, the way I lead my kids, the way I love my bride, the way I love my husband, the way I do whatever, treat my house, all of that might be foolishness to the world, but it's wisdom to God.